Right, hello, welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 182, and this episode is called, because you'll understand as I go through. It's not going to be an overly long episode this week, and as per the title, there's not going to be an awful lot of information of great interest, to be perfectly frank, unless, like me, you just want to be able to understand the extent of just exactly how pointless the offices within government are. And so I will be continuing with this audit of the MOD and covering three so-called entities of some description. So I've got a bit of an abscess on my tongue at the minute. Anyway, because the information that I'm going to be doing in this episode, and that isn't exactly the most interesting, I've got something a little bit amusing from earlier on this week just to get us going with. And so basically I'd seen a report on YouTube and that was produced by Tim Pool, one of his sort of early in the day reports, where he was talking about some recent geomagnetic events. And quite early on in his report, he sort of made mention of this, of an article where there was a claim about 21 trillion being spent on underground doomsday bunkers. And I figured I'd look that piece of information up, and that just out of general interest. And I found that there was quite a large number of publications that had actually picked up on that story, which I thought was a bit odd. And then as I started to read into it, it turned out that the source of this claim was a certain Catherine Austin Fitts. And I know Catherine Austin Fitts from past experience, particularly within that Doctors for COVID Ethics group. And so essentially what I did was I just put a throwaway post up on Twitter, as you can see, just saying, it's come from her, so therefore it's bollocks. But I thought I'd tag in Tim Pool just for shits and giggles, really. Well, as you can see down below there, despite me not tagging her in at all, and that, I mean, I was just doing a very disposable sort of little comment, but she decided to respond saying that she hadn't actually said this. It raised a couple of points, really, which is that why is this story from her being so widespread in the first place? I mean, that's slightly odd in and of itself. And why on earth is she responding to little old me? Unless she's, well, not just her, but those around her, shall we say, are somewhat obsessed with checking any mention of anything that goes on within her circles, shall we say. I'm sure there are certain ones within her circle that are a bit obsessed with this type of stuff, but for her to be the one that responded directly, I found that quite amusing. Anyway, the thing is that when you get people like this Catherine Austin Fitts, and I mean, quite frankly, the reason why I've said that anything that came from her and that is going to be bollocks is because if ever you wanted to see a prime example of what fits into the description of controlled opposition, it's this woman. So the thing about it is when you get people like this, they can't really help themselves but to trip all over themselves at the same time as they're rushing to jump out and try to tamper down anybody that dares talk against them. And so, unfortunately, the response that I could quite easily say to her response of, "I never said this," is just, yeah, you did. I mean, obviously in that it must have got the attention because it's Tucker Carlson that she was on. But all of the articles are not really concentrating on, oh, Tucker has brought on some conspiracy theorist or anything like that. They were actually putting it in quite serious terms, which it shouldn't be taken in. Um, but I just found this sort of thing and that really quite funny, because most of my posts that go up on Twitter, and that doesn't really get an awful lot of attention, the fact that it had got at that particular point in time, which wasn't that long after I'd posted it, it already had over 1,000 people checking it out. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, and quite a level of hint of paranoia there that kind of suggests that, yeah, a bit of a nail on the head was hit. But the subsequent result of this was that anybody that watches Tim Pool understands he does these sort of articles during the day, and then in the evening he does like a round table chat about the news that he's basically reported on earlier on in the day. And he got to the point of talking about it in the evening. And whereas he put this particular article quite high up in the discussion in the earlier reporting, he then pushed it right to the back, just kind of put it on screen and say, is anybody aware of this? And I don't know anything about this and that. And it could have been written by some crazy lady. And that was it. That was the total extent of the coverage that he gave it. So quite a difference between how he'd reported on it earlier on in the day. So a bit of a throwaway post had a slightly better than anticipated outcome, I suppose. I say quite petty and all the rest of it, but then it's not really petty if you can get just even some sort of a minor little victory against these fucking people that go out and try to destroy anybody that is trying to organise anything of any substance, because that's effectively what people like her do. They just go in there and make sure that everything gets taken down or taken into some lunatic path of utter nonsense, which is effectively what happened with the likes of that Doctors for COVID ethics. And so any sort of minor victory along those lines, yeah, I'll count that as a little bit of a win. I'm sure there's some people out there that think, that know who this woman is already and has possibly suspected, oh, no, she's one of the ones that's on our side. No, she's not. Like I say, she's absolutely the epitome of what they used to call the controlled opposition. Bit of a silly term, realistically, but it does actually apply in this instance. So that was just a little bit of fun that was taking place during the week. And so now on to the absolute boring shit, which is the standard process. So I'm going to start off this week by taking a look at the Independent Medical Expert Group. And so here we get is another one of these advisory groups that gets expenses but doesn't report on what they actually are. So there's no numbers to go along with it. It's another one of these ones that hasn't been around long, so it's only been in existence since 2012 in this instance. And that is something that I do think is a little bit too often missed in these kinds of circumstances, where you have people out there that think that removing these kinds of quangos is going to be some great difficulty, and how are you going to be able to run governments if you don't have them? Or is it going to be replaced by something worse than this? I mean, give me a break. I mean, it wouldn't be some kind of a tragedy if this disappeared and was never to be seen again. There is literally no discernible benefit that you get from the formation of these organisations. Like I said, just because something exists now, it doesn't mean it has to stay. We managed for absolute centuries before this came along in 2012. So the only thing that I can really ascertain from this is it seems to have about 14 people as of the moment. It had previously had about 16. And apparently they claim that they meet once a quarter, but then only report biannually. And then even within those reports and that, it doesn't demonstrate any value whatsoever. It's just an absolute nonsense. I mean, in terms of what it is that they're actually supposed to be doing and feeding in this advice to the this armed forces compensation scheme, It's literally them sitting there and collecting what they consider to be research papers, which is a problem in and of itself, considering the level of corruption that there is in medically focused academia. And shouldn't really have to explain it and that, but because of the level of impact and that you have, and with the pharma funding, and then the useful idiots in government as well, and that would force out anything and that just pushes experimentation on people. Obviously quite pertinent this week after that utter guff of the so-called COVID inquiry, but I dealt with that 3 years ago. But anyway, basically what you've got here is something that's created a situation which is not much more than a reading circle. And where, generally speaking, that, I mean, do you know if the material that they're reading is fiction or not? There's no information here, and that to say that this is of any value whatsoever, or something that an actual competent doctor wouldn't know themselves or should know themselves. And that would again be a problem in and of itself. But I just don't see it. So because this is feeding into a compensation scheme for injuries for our boys that might be getting some kind of injuries in service, and I'm not just talking about somebody that's been shot or blown up or something like that. There are other areas of injury. And I noticed that there was one particular paper that was around tinnitus. That catches my attention because I've got tinnitus, but not through any military situation. But it shouldn't be the case that you've got these people that are turning around and taking up papers that, especially when it is related to a compensation scheme, you know damn well that they're going to be looking towards finding anything that means that you don't have to get paid out. That's basically what you're looking at here as a problem. So considering I know it is obvious that they can't put up anything that justifies their own existence, so I just don't really see any need for this particular expert group. So next one. Nuclear Research Advisory Council. Sounds like it should be impressive again, doesn't it? But take a look at those areas of expertise that they're supposed to have. You've got your nuclear physics and your systems engineering and all the kind of stuff, and that where it would be pretty easy to understand if the people that you're talking about actually have that expertise. And so apparently they're going to be advising on the design and manufacture of nuclear warheads. Really? Presumably not via old Nurse Ratched at the DNO, who I covered last week, and because I noticed that they literally have it on here, and that is going to be a source of providing assistance. What assistance are you going to get from her? Utter bollocks. I mean, all of it looks like we've got something that it looks like it's something where you should have some critical knowledge in a particular sector, but it's noticeable that they lack informing who's on this particular council, because I guarantee that none of that expertise actually exists. Absolutely bloody guarantee it. And then when you also take a look at the information that is available, they've produced only one report back in 2014, which was another one of these ones that turned around and said we should exist. Not what it is that they do or what have they done or anything like that. Just, oh yeah, we should exist and we should get expenses. Really? So that's why there's no numbers insofar as this one is concerned either. Now, could it be that they produce information that just cannot be published? I would imagine that the answer to that is no. Like I said, I bet it's because this is yet another one of these councils where it's being filled up by useful idiots that have been passed up the chain, don't have a clue what they're talking about, but they've had to be thrown out of some office or other and that and fail upwards, and just give them some money and stick them out of the way somewhere. If we was expecting to see any kind of a real documentation that demonstrated credibility, I bet they couldn't produce it. And that's why we're in another one of these situations where why would we waste our time having these things on our books? It's an absolute nonsense, as per usual. And then we get into the exceptionally long named. Is longly a word? Don't think so. So the Scientific Advisory Committee on the Medical Implications of Less Lethal Weapons. And there you go. Similar ilk to the previous two. It's not that difficult to understand really, and that's what it is they think that they're supposed to be doing. But again, the last time anything that was reported here was in 2016, and that was in relation to tasers. I mean, keep in mind again, this is about the MOD. I'm not entirely certain that the military should have a great deal of use for tasers instead of just having a gun to kill whoever it is that's in front of them. It's all a bit stupid. And, you know, they have the statements about, oh, we'll consider the medical implications. Well, surely the implication of being on the receiving end of the military is that you're dead. It's not really rocket science, this one, is it? So, you know, I mean, I'm sure that with this sort of stuff and that you'll have people like the Irish that'll cry about this sort of thing and that, because, you know, the typical terrorists that you've had there, and that, you know, they're supposed to kill who they want, but, you know, they can kill civilians, they can kill people in other countries, they can do whatever the hell that they like, but then they'll cry like bitches for decades if they've so much as suffered a broken fingernail. So they're going to be demanding this sort of stuff, aren't they? Oh, it's going to be a less lethal weapon. You can't touch us. We'll prosecute you decades afterwards. Yes, I will throw in a little bit of red meat. And I have to point this sort of stuff out, and that because it is relevant to a lot of the stuff that you see today, because when you go one of the wailing sand people, that if anybody so much as farts near them and they go into screaming mode like the absolute pussies that they are, you have to understand that an awful lot of that strategy that they employ was taught to them by the Irish terrorists. You have to understand consequences of things, where things come from. But in terms of this particular organisation, there's literally nothing to it. Utter waste of time. If you've got a Ministry of Defence, and you have your military operating underneath it, what you do is when you come across scumbags that you're supposed to be fighting on the basis of justified actions, just shoot and kill them. That's what you're supposed to do. That's the point of the military. You don't go up and tickle them and then get blown up or prosecuted for it afterwards. This wussification of let the enemy do what they want, but you have to be narrowed into this tiny little corner and that where you're only allowed to just tap somebody on the shoulder, because that's what you're basically boiling things down to as it goes forward. No, not at all. So this sort of stuff, I mean, if you want to talk about tasers and things like that, then, you know, I mean, that's a police matter. It's not a military matter. This doesn't belong in the MOD. Simple as that, really. So basically, I'm going to leave it at those three for this week. There's no numbers to add to the cumulative because adding those three in there, there's no numbers to report, no numbers to add to it. And then obviously it shouldn't be any shock at all that I would remove these from the books. They're utterly pointless, useless, don't need them. So there's one small added benefit that I'm not going to put in as part of the taxpayer saving, but it would actually end up being this sort of look after the pennies and the pounds look after themselves situations, because if you do start removing nonsense like this just from the web page alone, that means that your hosting costs are going to be reduced because you don't have pages and pages of utter guff that nobody needs. So it does actually have a bit of an implication, in addition to not having any expenses to retards that don't know what they're talking about. And yet more quangos that nobody needs. They serve no purpose. And no, they would not have any consequence that would then require departments increasing their staff all over the country in order to be able to make up for it. No, not true. You're supposed to have competent people in house already, and if you haven't, there's half your problem right there. So it's not a difficult train of thought, really, is it? So I'll give you fair warning that there is more of this sort of crap to come, but you know, it is part of the process, and I do have to show each and every one. And the point of this process is to let people understand what government actually looks like, and you can start to see this overblown, bloated waste of space where expert non-experts have some sort of seat where they can have access to our money and produce, in each of the instances that I've looked at tonight, literally fuck all. We don't need it. When everybody's talking about the economy's in a bad way, so we must find savings, and every single time they just go, welfare. Got to go for the welfare. Well, no, you've got to stop giving welfare to a bunch of foreigners that have literally just turned up in a dinghy, or a bunch of, I've just turned up through Charlie's airport and been waved through. All the third worlders that don't belong here. No, you take the benefits away from people like that. But in terms of reducing waste in government, welfare is not your first port of call. Actually reducing the size of government, no matter how seemingly insignificant, get those books down. Because working on the big ticket items, that's when you start running into who's going to be able to complain about it and how are you going to be able to mitigate that. You can walk through the door and go, right, here's the low-hanging fruit. Let's get rid of that so we don't have that coming back to yak at us later on. Just walk through the door, day one, don't need you, gone. There's no budget for it anymore, it's gone. There's no legislative need for it, it's gone. Solve these things. And then you can literally turn around and come to the public and go, here's what the size of government actually look like, if you can find a screen big enough to fit it on, and go, now this is what we've done. Considering so many things, I mean, I mentioned this right at the beginning of this process. You have to push back on some of the areas of the psychological abuse that has been put onto the public, where everybody seems to think that everything has to be done through daddy government, or more particularly mummy government, as the way it seems to work. Push back on it, and you go, right, now I've just, there you go, government size. Oh, it now fits on the screen. You can actually see what government looks like now, instead of this great big bloody map. Psychologically, that has an effect on the public. They can turn around and go, oh yeah, I can see that has happened, and I can't notice a bloody thing. There is no change, there's no impact. And when people start to understand that when you are making these changes, it will not have an impact on them, they won't notice any difference whatsoever, then you've got more chance of getting them to come together with you, and that's to say, right, now we've got to hit some of the bigger stuff where there could be some impact, but we're going to do it in such a way to mitigate the impact that you end up on the receiving end of. There's ways and means of doing things. It's called strategy. I know there's lots of people that are very short on that these days. They talk a lot of it and don't actually do any of it. I mean, I saw just a minute ago that you've got the latest YouTube channel from that Restore, the Rupert Lowe thing, where he's got his two young fellas with him. That, you know, I mean, fair enough. You know, I'm not particularly complaining too much about that, except for the fact that the young lads themselves are looking at government as if they're the first person to ever discover what it looks like. It's like, yeah, we know, lads, we know. We've been around a bit longer than you. We're well aware. We do actually know what freedom of information means. Some of us have been using it for quite some time, lad. And then they're talking about, oh, how we managed to have this petition put together and that, so we got a debate. Okay, you had a debate. And? Then what? What happened then? Nothing. And it's, we're pushing the conversation. Well, no, not really. Not really. If you don't see any actual actions behind it, then it's all a bit meaningless. I mean, everybody turned around and said, oh, we've pushed the conversation that resulted in this shamalama ding dong, whatever a bleeding name is, at the Home Office, coming out with a, oh yes, now I'm going to do something about migration, where she used words that meant nothing, except for, I'm going to continue doing more of the same, and you're going to pick up the tab for it. So that conversation has not shifted one bit, not one iota. But people seem to think that if a few words are said in a couple of different locations, that means something. Not really, because there's no threat behind any of it. And this is why I'll always keep coming back to the fact that if you're going to do something, look towards how are you going to be holding people to account on a personal level, not something that ends up being a Pyrrhic victory where the taxpayer ends up having yet more bills to pay for something that they didn't do. Have more to do with the personal accountability. Push towards that recall system. Have a system where you are looking towards going, right, we are looking for competent individuals. If Rupert Lowe is sitting in our house at the moment as an independent, thinking that he's actually making something happen, well then, what would the house look like if it was full of Rupert Lowes? That we've all decided that we found these people. We determined that they are actually competent at doing these things. That would be an actual threat to the muppets that come through the party system, wouldn't it? And they can't turn round and set out their campaign to go, oh, that party, they're all racist. Not that anybody should give a shit if that is said to you anyway. But if you've got a whole bunch of independents springing up, and with a bunch of people behind them saying, yep, we're now going to be following process of accountability, so anybody in any constituency could be subject to being held to account, and massive demand for that seat to be vacated, and then we'll bring in our person. That's an actual threat, isn't it? Just, oh, we've had a debate. Doesn't do anything. Oh, and I have advocated before that petitions are actually worthwhile because it's the data that you want from behind it. Which constituency has got the most vocal people within it, where you can use that as a basis to be able to start gathering your numbers to then force that accountability. If you don't make use of the information that you're being given, and if your entire goal is, I had a debate, you're not really achieving anything. People need to understand a little bit more as to how you actually get things done. And so, like I say, this kind of stuff where, like I said, I mean, within this episode and what I've just covered, it literally is a case of, But how do you use that? How do you use something that is as mundane as that? Psychology, it's gone. We've reduced the size of government. Did it impact your bills? No. But did it impact all the services that you keep whining about? No. So it didn't matter then, did it? Didn't need it then, did you? We can reduce government waste. And then when you actually dig into it and what the expenditure was and all of the rest of it, you will find that there are some numbers. You can say, okay, we've reduced government by 150,000, whatever it is. It's money off, isn't it? You keep pushing away at these things. And I know that I know from past experience that you get these idiots that'll turn around and go, oh, that's an insignificant amount of money. That's not going to do anything. It's, no matter how small an amount it is, that's less money that you have to take from somebody else then, isn't it? It's more money off. It's increasing your ability to be able to reduce whatever legitimate debt that there might actually be. If you can pay off your debt by 150,000 more than you thought, great. If indeed you need to do that at all. Look after the pennies, the pounds will look after themselves. So, because the subject matters this week and that, like I say, weren't exactly enthralling, it's not exactly the most exciting episode ever. And yes, an awful lot of what I've said here at the end is a repetition of things that I've said before. But it bears repeating. Because A, you get people that are coming along that are fresh to this. And then you get the other situation where it's a case of it needs to be driven home. So people actually understand that there are things that you can do which are a little bit more significant than I've had a debate. So that's enough waffle, I think, and as soon as I said it was going to be a shorter episode, I'm going to make sure it is. So see you next week. Cheers. Bye bye.